Paul, you went to USC and you took screenwriting at USC, correct?
Actually, Columbia. I studied screenwriting at Columbia University, and I taught at USC for 5 years during the 90s. I was originally a English major, then a history major at Columbia as an undergraduate. History was about stories, about people doing things, so there was maybe a natural inclination there. And then while I was an undergrad, we used to take our Super 8 sound camera and make comedy shorts. And this is, your audience may not remember this, but there was a time when movies were shown in front of big audiences, not on a little screen. And if you're working in comedy, it's very useful to show your stuff in front of an audience and find out what's working and what isn't. So we would do that. We were making movies, having fun. And then when I was an undergrad, I met Frank Danielle, who took over the film program at Columbia, along with Milos Forman, a director who was his former student. And I met Frank Danielle, took a class with him, and it was something of a revelation, his approach. I ostensibly sat in on it. I wasn't supposed to be there, but he let me do everything and write. It was a writing workshop. And so I wound up staying there to study as a grad student at Columbia with Frank Danielle, and then went out there and started writing, doing my thing, working both in theater and trying to write screenplays. And then when I moved to California, was able to sell a screenplay, get started with that, and then I'd always was interested in teaching because I had a good role model in Frank Danielle, but I didn't feel like I should teach until I'd actually sold something and maybe got something made, because it's like it validates the approach that you've been taught that you would then teach. And then I got an offer to teach at USC, and I thought, well, I haven't sold anything. And then I realized, oh, I have sold something. Yes, I would like to teach. So I wound up teaching there from 93 to 98. And that was a great experience, great students. And then in 98, I had an offer to come to Chapman University, and the film program was getting underway. It had been existing for a little while, but it had become a separate film school in 96. So I was just getting there I was the first screenwriting professor that they hired. And so I've been at Chapman ever since.
What were your notions of selling a screenplay when you were undergrad at Columbia versus once you had already been established at USC, come to Dodge College?
Well, to sell a screenplay, I guess you mean when I was a grad student. When I was an undergrad, I didn't know that movies are written. I didn't know that.
Sure, but what were some of your earlier notions of selling a screenplay, and what it would be like to be a working screenwriter versus having been, whether it be in the trenches or teaching or around career screenwriters?
Well, from the get-go, I was interested in, I guess you could say, connecting with an audience. Okay, so that's the impulse. And I saw myself as a filmmaker, not a screenwriter. And Frank Danielle's notion was that it's the same thing, that a film is made before it's shot. It's made on paper first. And a screenplay as a conception of a movie is the equivalent of filmmaking. In fact, Alfred Hitchcock was once quoted as saying, the writer told me this, the writer of Psycho said that when they had collaborated on the movie Psycho, the script, and the final meeting was just a formality with the producer, they were done with the project, he said Alfred Hitchcock looked really depressed. And the writer asked him, so what's wrong? Is something wrong with the script? He said, no, the script is fine. Now I have to go shoot it. So that idea of being a filmmaker was what motivated me. Now, in terms of the market back then, it's what I understood back then, and I don't think it's really any different now, is that there's nothing you can do to sell a screenplay. There's only things that you can do that increase the likelihood of it, because there's so many variables. And what my approach was I guess I called it the corporate sneak attack approach. I thought, okay, I'm a writer. I think I've gained a lot of skill with this teacher, but in order to connect with someone who can actually read it, I need to get into the industry. So I took the first job in the industry I could get, which was at Showtime. And that was about maybe 6 months after I graduated. Did temping for a while in New York City, and then was able to get a full-time job there just as a secretary. But I was able in that job to meet everybody in the company because I was like a permanent temp, floating around and meeting pretty much everybody in the company as I worked in the different departments, and then was able to eventually do script reading, and then by that means meet an agent. So you're asking, what was the approach to selling a screenplay? Any number of things can happen, but my strategy was to try to make connections through work and get someone to read the script. And that's how I did it. I also would just send out postcards to agents describing my background, and also I got recognition from a contest, the Nickel Fellowship, and the Writers Guild had a fellowship. So I said, okay, I've been recognized, read my stuff. And just keeping on going, persisting, and trying also to keep on with the craft. It was a day job, but my ideal schedule that I tried to keep was wake up at 5 in the morning, go for a quick run, then write for a couple hours, and then go to work at 9 and coast the rest of the day because the important stuff was done. One bit of advice that I always followed that Frank Daniel had suggested, he said, and I think Lawrence Kasdan, the writer-director, also had a similar idea. He said, don't get a job. When you do your day job and you're earning you're paying your dues, don't get a job that's somewhat creative, because it can satisfy your creative impulse, and then you won't be as passionate about your writing. So for example, don't go into copywriting for PR advertising. Don't go into marketing, things where you're going to write copy or publicity or whatever areas might have that, because you're going to do that during the day and you're going to create something, and then you're going to go home and you're not going to be as hungry for that. So when I wound up settling down at Showtime, I wound up in research, which was quiet. Nobody did anything except generate these statistical reports, and I would just sit there and write my screenplays during the day as much as I could. Don't tell anybody at Showtime that. I tried to tell them I was working hard, but you know how it is. So I don't know, does that answer your question about the market or my expectations for how to sell? Just write something that people don't want to put down, that grabs them, that can't put down, and then be patient and try working one step at a time to get it out there and to meet people that can maybe get something done with it. And the first writing actual job that I got was through a friend. And this is in the 1990s, so there was a period of a lot of independent, low-budget stuff going on. And I had a degree in this. I'd studied with it. People knew what I'd studied. I had a sample script. I had a new one a couple of new ones that I'd done. And through that means some director was looking for a collaborator on a rewrite of a project. And it was just somebody I knew. And so you get a few $1,000s and you get something. And then you just get started that way. That was the market back then. And then nowadays, it's in some ways it's because of this outburst of output, of production happening. I think it's probably a much better situation. You have, I like to say, George Lucas, when he came into the industry, he said that he felt like a seam opened up in history. A seam opened and he and his cohort got in at a very special moment in history, and they were able to do these amazing things. And I feel like a seam in history has opened up again with the arrival of streaming and with the internet being able to be a distribution place, and the apparent demand for product now. Right now it's happening. Whether all these streaming things will survive, whether something like Quibi can really generate, there's a big enough market for a 10-minute webisodes on your cell phone, we're going to find out. But right now, they're out there looking for material and they have to generate it. So that's a lot of interesting things happening.